We were all witnesses to a historic moment this week, to historic news that former Vice President Joe Biden, Democratic nominee for president, chose Kamala Harris to be his running mate. Harris is the first woman of color, first African-American and descent and South Asian American descent woman on a major party ticket. Interestingly, she's also married to a Jewish man and has Jewish stepchildren who refer to her not as Kamala, but the Yiddish Mamala. No matter who wins in November, Trump with his Jewish daughter and Jewish son-in-law and Jewish grandchildren, Harris with her Jewish husband and Jewish stepchildren, there'll be a presence in the White House with immediate Jewish family members. That really and truly says something about the American Jewish experience. Anti-Semitism be damned. But this pick of Kamala Harris to be Joe Biden's running mate is not historic because of her Jewish husband. It's historic, it's monumental, because she is the first Black woman on a major party ticket. In their first joint appearance together this week in Wilmington, Delaware, Harris spoke about her own mother's fears about raising Black girls in this country, growing up, teaching them how to respond to police, how to respond in a world where they were treated as other, as different. Joe Biden spoke about his hope, his dream, that young women of color, young Black and brown girls would see Kamala Harris and say, this is possible for me. That one day I could be in the Oval Office, one day I could be vice president, I could be president. As a U.S. Senator from California, as Attorney General of the largest state in the union, she's certainly qualified. I'm not here to argue her qualifications. I'm not here to tell you whether to vote for her or not. That's not my job, although many of you certainly know where I stand personally. My goal is to emphasize the importance in this moment of having a woman of color on a major party ticket. Representation matters. You see, this summer, America has spent the spring and summer facing a spiritual and moral reckoning, a communal cheshbon hanefesh, an accounting of the soul of our nation. Following the murders of George Floyd and Breonna Taylor at the hands of police officers, murders that are just two in a long line of cases where men and women of color are killed by police. And we as a community are a community that promises to be committed to tzedek, tzedek tirdov, this biblical command that we read next week in Parashat Shoftim, that we need to pursue justice, that we can't wait for justice to come to us. We need to run after it. And so this time of year, there's been this reckoning, this cheshbon hanefesh, to say it's our time to tirdof, it's our time to pursue justice, it's our time to march and protest. And in order to do that, I believe, we need to make sure that the voices that matter most are in the room and seated at the table, because the systemic racist reality of America that was founded almost 250 years ago is based on these founding fathers that were racist themselves, founding fathers, many of whom owned slaves, all of whom were white men. We're living in a country which is based on a foundation of white men, in a country that increasingly is celebrated for its diversity, is defined by those who look very different than me, those that are not white men. In fact, the 116th Congress, our current Congress that was elected in November 2018, is the most diverse Congress in history, because representation matters. No matter who you support, and some of you may say that Kamala Harris is too liberal, and some of you may say, actually, she's not liberal enough, and some of you may say she was the perfect pick to be Joe Biden's running mate. It doesn't matter. It's a historic one. It's a historic choice. And if we really care about justice, if we really care about fighting for justice, and equity and equality, and ending a systemic racist society we live in, then it's a choice worth celebrating. She was qualified, and I do not believe she was chosen because she was a Black woman. Somebody should not be chosen based on gender or race or ethnicity. And her qualifications can be celebrated, but the fact that she is a woman of color should be celebrated as well. Because representation matters. This broken system will not be solved, will not be fixed by a room full of white men. Our Haftorah this week that we just chanted, the third of these Haftorot of consolation, these Haftorot of comfort and care after Tisha B'Av, leading us up to the highest of highs of Rosh Hashanah, are Haftorot of promise of transformation. And that's what we read this week when we read in the book of Isaiah, chapter 54, in the beginning of chapter 55, a promise of a spiritual and a physical transformation. The Haftorah promises, Bitstaka tikonani, rachaki me'oshek, ki lo tirai. Ki lo tirai. You shall be established through righteousness. You shall be safe from oppression. You shall have no fear. I fear that as summer has moved on, we have forgotten the fierce urgency of now. I fear that protests and marches have quieted down without resulting in the necessary and essential police reform. In a moment, we'll chant the blessing for the new month, announcing that the new month of Elul begins in the week to come. This month, the last month, until the High Holy Days, until Rosh Hashanah, until 5781. This month is the month when we're supposed to do Cheshbon HaNefesh, when we're supposed to do our own personal accounting of our souls. If we don't put in the work, then the high holiday experience on Rosh Hashanah will not be impactful, will not be spiritually fulfilling. We won't be able to make the changes in our lives. We won't be able to accomplish those resolutions for 5781 that we'll be making. And so too, if our country doesn't do that Cheshbon HaNefesh, we can't make that change. And I worry that Cheshbon HaNefesh stopped when the marching and the protesting quieted down. Because we can't stop doing the necessary work. We can't stop marching and protesting, and we can't just do that. We can't just tweet hashtag Black Lives Matter. It's about making sure that those who are in elected office support changing this broken system, change a culture of police brutality, change a culture of systemic racism. And while somebody should never be judged, as I said, based on gender or race, having a Black woman on a major party ticket, regardless of her views, regardless of if you agree with her or not, is something that we should celebrate because it brings us one step closer to having the necessary voices at the table to say, this is what needs to be done to change what impacts me, to change what impacts her, to change what impacts you, to change what impacts them. It's a step in the right direction, a necessary direction to ensure that in the year 5781, which is only weeks away, we truly end systemic racism and bistaka tiknonani, as our Haftorah says. We reestablish America and reestablish American values that fulfill the so-called American promise, that are based on righteousness, based on justice for all. Shabbat Shalom.